Here's just one example of how it might work. You've got a government employee, let's say the guy works for the IRS, and he dies. And then nobody knows that he dies in the federal government. And because the government's so inefficient and the guy doesn't really do a lot of work anyway, his cousin just finds out that he dies and starts cashing his paycheck. Welcome to Silverman Law Firm's Weekly Docket, episode 59, where we talk legal news and practical law. Today is February 28th, 2025. I'm Phil Silverman, owner of the firm and your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Austin Black, who works in our Dallas office. Mr. Black is taking a little visit to NYC today. Real quick, Austin, what is the thing you're looking most forward to doing in New York City?
Looking the most forward to doing in New York City is there's a French pastry shop that I really want to try that I've seen. Like, they have these really big croissants with strawberry cream with them. I want to try that. I'm very excited. Yes.
Okay. New York has some amazing food. Always a good thing to do.
Well, you were talking about potatoes earlier, right? That you just had a potato.
Yes.
What is your opinion on potatoes and sugar?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of sugar, but generally sugar makes everything taste better. And unless it's barbecue from North Carolina. But anyway, if you haven't eaten barbecue from North Carolina, you're not going to get that. But New York's a great place for food and the senses. Austin is going to have a wonderful time there this weekend hanging out. But anyway, Austin, enough about that. What is on our docket today, Mr. Black?
So, a short show today, but still some interesting stuff. We're going to start off talking about how Texas has recently started in circumstances allowing legal assistants or paralegals to practice law, to actually give legal advice. There are certain stipulations around when exactly they can do that, but in some circumstances they can, which is quite a deviation from just historically what they've been allowed to do. Then I'd be moving on to talking about a question that I'm sure everyone has when they think about Elon Musk is, how much does his lawyer charge? That was what all of you were wondering. Now you'll know, okay, after this show. Moving on to our legal questions section, we will be answering the question of how you can register domain names that include big brand names. Are there issues with copyright, issues with trademark? People get the two conflated. We'll explain the difference between the two really quickly and exactly what you can do when you're putting a big brand name, a name for your website. And then finally, a question that we get quite frequently when people call us after they've purchased a house. If your inspector missed issues that you have with your foundation on your home, what are your remedies? Can you sue? Is it a good idea with the likelihood of success? There are a few different things you'll want to consider when looking at that question, but hopefully we'll be able to give you a framework with which you can approach it if you ever do find yourself there, which hopefully you don't, but if you do, it'll help. And then finally, our rant and rave section, we're going to be talking about the government paying federal employees that may or may not exist. I personally would not like to pay employees that don't exist, but the government seems to be okay with it.
Yeah, I just learned all about that for this show, and I had no idea. Anyway, sounds like a good show. Let's go ahead and get it kicked off with our legal news section. And the first thing we're talking about is this proposed rule by the Supreme Court of Texas that's going to allow paralegals, legal assistants, they're calling them LPPs, licensed paralegal professionals, to offer some limited services without a lawyer. So some of the things they're talking about, Austin, is family law cases like uncontested divorces, landlord-tenant disputes, maybe doing some basic things like drafting a will. The Supreme Court is saying, hey, poor people, and this is directed at low-income people, poor people need access to lawyers. They're not getting the access. So let's go ahead and let legal assistants provide them some services. Austin, what do we think? What do you think about this? Just off the top of your head.
I think it's great. I think that so often you'll see if you go to a courthouse first Tuesday of every month, past that with foreclosures, or then if we go to like JB courts with evictions, sometimes you'll see an attorney sitting out there who will offer free advice to people, but it's really rare nowadays. And I think it'd be great if there were more people available to provide legal assistance and answer questions and maybe some limited legal work for these people who may not otherwise be able to afford counsel. especially with things like landlord-tenant issues and family law cases.
Yeah, I also think it's great. All right. I just had a call before we started shooting this show, and it was a landlord-tenant issue. It was a tenant that had a problem, wanted to get out of the lease. The heat had not been working in the house for 3 months. It was a real bad deal. I had to quote that tenant our standard hourly rates, and it was really unaffordable for that tenant. But if they can go somewhere else and get some basic type of service, then that's a great thing. The rule has been put on hold. Okay, no surprise. There's been some lawyers that are very vocal and very protective about this maybe infringing upon their income, and they've come up with some debatable arguments put forth to the Texas Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is now pausing it, taking some time to do some analysis. So we'll see where that comes out. I do think it's a great thing. I will tell you, I am concerned that the rule itself may be a little bit behind the technology. And here's why. With all this AI stuff coming out, we're now able to offer much more affordable legal services by leveraging AI. It's still not quite all the way there yet, but it's getting there. And I'm wondering if the better method is not to have a lawyer supervising some of this AI generated content to get assistance. So
if you just, because we talked a little bit about it, but if you just use AI, it's going to cite cases that don't exist, things like that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the framework of the ability to actually do legal research and verify these things, because it can be great as like a baseline of where to start drafting a motion, drafting a pleading, or something like that. But if you can't go and verify that that case actually says what ChatGPT is saying it says, probably not a good idea.
Yeah. And so I will play the devil's advocate and let me argue why this may be a bad idea. We see a lot of very bad legal documents drafted illegally at this point as the unauthorized practice of law that come out of legal assistants and notaries that are illegally practicing law. Now, this is usually in the Hispanic community, where you drive in Hispanic neighborhoods in Texas and you see those signs that say notario, okay? And they're coming in, and Hispanic people, like in Mexico, for example, that literally translates to lawyer. That is a lawyer in Mexico. So they're coming here to the States, getting confused, and they're going to get a deed or a will by a legal assistant in a Hispanic neighborhood. And that's caused a lot of problems. So there needs to be some supervision. There needs to be some guidance. So this is why I think Austin and I both think this is a great idea. There are some issues where this can certainly go awry.
Yeah, agree.
All right, let's go ahead and go on to our next legal news topic. And this was just caught my attention. How much does Elon Musk's lawyer cost? And I was like, how much does it cost? Who is, first of all, Austin, who's his lawyer? Who is he represented and how much does he charge?
Yeah, so his lawyer is named Alex Spiro, or I want to call him Alex Spyro because, I mean, that's a very old Sony game that I enjoyed when I was a kid. Spiro or Spyro, it's probably Spiro's. He charges Elon Musk, and I asked a friend of mine, like right before this show, is like, what do you think? What do you think Elon Musk's lawyer charges? The first thing he guessed was, I think, like $1,200-ish. And I was like, nope, higher. It went to 5,000. Then we got down to 3,000. Eventually on the third one, we're just like hitting all around it. But yeah, $3,000 an hour is what he charged Elon Musk. And I guess when you are the richest man in the world, that really doesn't impact your bottom line at all.
Maybe he's worth it. Here's a list of clients that this Alex. If you don't know who Alex Spiro is, he worked in the district attorney's office in Manhattan, actually where Austin is right now. And then he went into private practice. He's started to represent some really famous clients. He's represented Jay-Z, the rapper, in a lawsuit. He's represented Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, in the whole issue with the bribery cases that the DOJ just decided to not prosecute him on. He's represented Robert Kraft, who's the owner of the Patriots, for soliciting prostitution.
Not the cheese guy.
No, it is the same family.
It is the cheese guy. Wow. So it's also the
it's the same. It's the same family. And then Alec Baldwin. You remember we did the piece on Rust with the whole manslaughter thing? He represented Alec Baldwin in that. Austin, you and I have always joked around, and we did a show. Our rates are $350 to $450 an hour. We were talking about some of these big firm lawyers charging $1,500 an hour, $2,000 an hour, and we said no attorney is worth it. That was just my blanket statement. But there's an exception. If the guy is so good and that's just who you can get as a trialer and he's going to get you off or whatever, then maybe he is worth it. I don't think Alex Spiro does anything special. The example we were talking about, Austin, was more in the case if you had like a highly specialized patent litigator who was also had a PhD
in fluid dynamics that you need to understand this patent or something. Yeah.
And I've got a friend of mine, by the way, that has a PhD in fluid dynamics. Anyway, that's another story. But I don't know if Alex Spiro is worth it. I tend to think he's not, but he certainly has the brand, and Elon Musk and all these famous people think he's worth it, and that's what he's getting. It's just a cool little fact thing. It came up in my legal news search this week. So there you have it. Also, if you did something, I'm not going to say, let's say you needed a lawyer, you needed this kind of guy, say maybe you were soliciting prostitution or you were being bribed by the Turkish government.
I think that's more likely for me to be government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or shot somebody with a gun that you thought had blanks in it, any of those things.
Or if I was bribed by the Turkish government to shoot a prostitute by a gun that got blanks in it, all those together.
All together. Yeah. And you just say you got tons of money. Would you go and solicit Alex Spiro's services, or would you just think you needed a good, solid litigator?
If that was my fact pattern, I probably would go solicit Alex too.
Okay, that's what you need. So you're the guy. You're specializing in prostitution, guns,
Turkey.
And bribery. Yeah, and not in that order. All right, there you have it. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our legal question section. And this, Austin, this came up. This is about registering domain names, that include big brand names. And I hate when I talk about friends because I've got a lot of friends that listen to the show, and even if I don't mention them by name, they listen to the show and they know that it's them, and then they feel like idiots. Sure. But I'm going to do it anyway, just because that's how I roll. I had a friend of mine email me, and he's Phil, I've got this brilliant idea. And he just started registering, because AI is everything. So he just started registering all these really big brands with the .ai domain. So Coca-Cola.ai, all right? Or Louis Vuitton.ai, all right? Whatever, fill in the blank. And he was like, I just received a cease and desist letter or something like that. And I want to know, I read an article and I believe I'm completely in the right and I can have this domain name. All right. What do you think about that?
No, is this friend an attorney?
No.
Okay.
He's not a lawyer.
First up, those are my favorite kind of emails to get from clients though. I read an article about this and I think this is the legal strategy we should take.
Yeah.
But before this show, you can't do that. Okay. It's called cyber squatting.
Okay, so so I'm surprised that you knew about that.
Yeah, I did.
Being your age.
Yeah, no, I knew.
Because I had forgotten about this. And what Austin's talking about is we have an anti-cyber squatting Consumer Protection Act, and it came about in 1999. Congress passed it. And Austin, you were too young, but we were all we thought it was a gold rush. We were all just registering domains. And back then we thought if we had exact name matches in the domain name, that Google was going to rank them higher. And we thought all these companies were going to pay us this money for domain names. And sometimes if you were the first one to register jobs.com, cars.com, you probably did okay. But they passed this act, and tell us what the Cyber Squatting Act is. And if you wanted to go register, Austin's wearing an Adidas cap. Adidas is not paying us for that. So if you wanted to go register Adidas.ai, tell us if you could do that under the Anti-Cyber Squatting Act.
Yeah, if you're registering a domain with a trademark like that, like Apple, Adidas, Coca-Cola, something like that, to profit from them, eventually selling them to the person who actually is that, with the company that owns that trademark, that's illegal under the Anti-Cyber Squatting Consumer Protection Act. Basically, it creates a statutory cause of action, the company, to sue the person who did that, who attained the domain, and then they can obtain legal fees and the transfer of the registration of the website. So,
yeah, that's it. Exactly it. So you don't get to do that. Now, there is one exception, and this is a little bit different, okay? Under a fair use doctrine, you can register something. I've got a Barbie example because I think this really did happen. This really was a case. You could have the website barbiesucks.ai.
Yeah.
And the whole website could be about why Barbie is terrible and making fun of the movie and the doll and all that. And that is probably considered a fair use because it's a commentary. So there are some exceptions, but no, registering Barbie.ai, and then even if you're just going to hold it, that you're probably not going to win. And then if you actually start doing something with the website where you like start selling Barbies and implying that you're affiliated with Barbie, that's a whole nother analysis that we're not going to get into under trademark infringement. And we've done that in the past, but that's the answer to that question.
So the reason I knew about that act, Phil, is the professor that I had for admin law was like, his primary practice was in patent and trademark. And so he mentioned about this. I didn't know about the whole gold rush thing, but he just mentioned this in my class.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
That's what we were all doing, like in the 90s. We were registering domain names and we thought we were going to get rich. But okay, so friend of mine, if you're listening to the show, I apologize if you feel internally embarrassed. We have not disclosed your name. No one knows who you are. So don't feel bad about that. If I see you around, don't think less of yourself.
Friend of Phil's, I think that was a great business idea, and your entrepreneurial spirit has probably made you more money than people who would not take that risk. So good on you.
There you go. All right. So the next legal question. My inspector missed that I have foundation issues. We get this quite a lot. What's the quickly, Austin? Like
the answer to can I sue is always yes. The answer is always yes. You ask me, can you sue for anything? I will say yes. Now, the question of whether that'll be successful is a different thing, but there are a few different standards relating to suing someone for a foundation issue. The first would be like negligence, right? If the inspector was negligent, did not actually perform an inspection of things that are normally done in the inspection process, right? There could be an issue, right? Because we talked about the negligence standard before, but there needs to be a duty. That duty needs to be breached. The breach needs to be a cause of damages to the person suing. And so if this inspector is just a normal home inspector, they don't get under the home and actually test the foundation, right, down walls and do what they need to do to see that, then you're probably going to have an issue, right? Because that could be a latent defect on the hole, right? Why that isn't commonly seen. And that's something we have people come to us about all the time. They're like, oh, I found this big foundation issue in my property. And they're like, oh, but there's no way they could have known about it there's no way the seller could have known about it. They did not get a specific foundation inspector to do a specific report that they could have done if they wanted to, but they just chose not to because it's expensive. Understandable.
Yeah, it's got to be something really obvious.
Yeah.
And so if you hire a run-of-the-mill Trek inspector and he comes in and the doors don't close and the windows don't go up and down and there's 1/4-inch cracks in the sheetrock, then that is so obvious. And if he doesn't tell you about that and put that in the report, then that probably is a good negligence case. But then you have to start asking yourself, why didn't you notice it when you walked in the house? Which is a whole nother factor. So most inspectors walk in, they look around. If it's not obvious, and then you later find out that you have foundation issues, you don't get to go back and sue your inspector.
Yeah.
Because that's the run-of-the-mill routine inspector is not expected to go and check for those things. Austin said, if you want a real foundation inspection, you need to go and hire a foundation or a structural engineer, really. Yeah. And the structural engineer has tools where he'll measure deviations. So from the center of the floor to the walls, and you're allowed 2 inches of deviation. I'm not going to get into all that. But if you're trying to sue an inspector, it has to be for something that he really should have caught, that other Trek inspectors, that if they were diligent and prudent, other Trek inspectors would have caught. And that's going to require testimony from a Trek inspector, from other Trek inspectors saying, oh yeah, I've inspected 100 homes and I definitely would have seen it. Okay. So that's the answer to that question. And that brings me to my favorite part of the show. This is our rant and rave section. I just learned about all this. Austin said he knew about this. Trump has been all over the news talking about this email. Elon Musk sent this email saying, hey, give me 5 things that you did last week. And the liberals or everybody has interpreted that as a performance review kind of thing. We're not going to get into all that. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But then Donald Trump started saying And I had never heard this before. No, we're just trying to see, do you have a pulse? Or Elon Musk said, do you have a pulse and a neuron? And Trump said, we're just trying to see if these people are really real and alive. They could just not even be real people. And I did not understand that. I was like, what do you mean? How are we paying all these people that aren't real people? And apparently there are these things called ghost employees in the federal government. Have you heard about this, Austin?
Yeah, I think that's like everyone that works at my local DMV. You go there and you think they're employees, but no one's moving through the lines, so they must be ghosts. No, yes, I have heard of this.
I didn't know about it. Allegedly, here's just one example of how it might work. You've got a government employee, let's say the guy works for the IRS, and he dies. And then nobody knows that he dies in the federal government. And because the government's so inefficient and the guy doesn't really do a lot of work anyway, his cousin just finds out that he dies and starts cashing his paycheck. And and the guy hasn't worked in like 10 years. That's just how that happens sometimes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then I learned that there are countries all over the world that this happens to. Most of these are really like third world countries like Nigeria and Kenya, where they have a lot of those problems, like 23,000 ghost employees in Nigeria, 12,000 in Kenya. So I was like, whoa. So I don't know how prevalent is this. No idea.
Yeah,
no idea.
I couldn't tell you.
I do have some interesting statistics that I wanted to bring to light real quick before we close. Everyone's talking about Doge and all this money that they're allegedly saving. Austin is not a Doge fan, so he's laughing.
No, I am a Doge fan, Phil. I am a Doge fan. But I'm a fan of the original Doge, like the dog meme. And it just makes me laugh so much that Elon Musk is just a Redditor. That's all he is. He's just a Redditor that has the most money in the world and wants to make everything a meme. And it's funny for a while, and then eventually you're just like, oh my gosh, what is our federal government?
All right, that's where Austin is on the thing. Doge alleges that they've saved, this is what I want to point out before we close. Doge alleges they've saved $64 billion. And they're trying to save $500 billion. That's not an insignificant amount.
Yeah.
To us as people. But I want to point out the whole federal deficit. That's the amount of money that we have to borrow to run the government because all of our revenue, it falls short of everything we're spending, is $1.8 trillion. So even if they save $500 billion, it still doesn't even bridge the gap to the deficit. And here's the other thing people don't realize. Most of our spending, over half of our total government spending is entitlement programs. That's like Social Security, unemployment, Medicaid, Medicare. Yeah. So that is not being touched. So this whole idea of Doge saving money, I think is a worthwhile endeavor, but it's not going to solve some very real problems in our economy. And I think that gets lost in the sensationalism of the media and the news coverage.
Yeah, like you hear the press secretary talking about specific programs that are cut, and they're like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's great. Like, I'm glad that those programs are being cut because they sound completely useless. Like things like a musical promoting like trans ideology in Nigeria or something bad. Like, sure, I don't want the government paying for that. But if you're cutting only like $100,000, $50,000, like I'd be so much more impressed if they said, okay, we cut that, and now the money is going here. We've worked with Congress to put the money here instead, helping veterans, helping people, helping programs to help people more go into a pipeline of like not unskilled labor, but like trade schools, like promoting trade schools, things like that actually help our economy. Worthwhile endeavors. Worthwhile endeavors. Yeah. And not just saying, oh, we're just cutting it, this like little 100,000 here, this little 50,000 here, but we're using it for this to actually help people here instead of sending it abroad for these things. I'd be a lot more so. Yeah.
And they're floating the idea of whatever they cut, 20% maybe going to American, being funded or refunded or distributed to American taxpayers. And then the other 20% paying down the federal deficit or paying down the federal debt. Rather.
I'll believe it when I see it.
That when Austin gets his check, which by the way will be highly inflationary and potentially cause other problems, but we're not going to get into that. That brings our show to a close. We're going to let Austin enjoy his time in New York. I've been your host, Phil Silverman. Austin Black is my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you get your podcast. If you have a legal question, email us at info@sildlawfirm.com. And as a reminder, nothing in this show is meant to be legal advice. This has all been for entertainment purposes only. Everybody have a great weekend.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Bye.